In this video, I'll break down the exact thinking process beginner and intermediate players need to stop blundering in chess. Most players misunderstand what actually causes blunders. I'll show you what to focus on to improve your calculation, sharpen your awareness, and drastically reduce costly mistakes. Enjoy the video. First things first, you need to have a structured approach when you're playing chess. That means that you need to have some sort of a goal in the opening. That means that you need to know what you're doing when it comes to developing your pieces, which squares you want to develop your pieces to. For example, if you play the Queen's Gambit, where do you want the knights to go? Where do you want the bishop to go? Do you want to develop the bishop to g5? Do you want to play b3 and put the bishop on g2? Where do you want to put your pieces? And what is your plan out of the opening? You don't have to memorize 20 moves of theory. You need to know where the pieces go and what your plans are to complete development. If you have a goal in the opening and you stick to that goal, you are going to make less mistakes because you're not really freestyling chess. Now you have a structured approach and you know what you are trying to do. Now I want to show you a game played by two famous players, Jose Raul Capablanca playing with the white pieces versus Rudolf Spielmann playing with black. So this game started out with d4, d5, knight to f3, e6, c4, and then knight to d7. So both sides are just simply developing your pieces, and that's going to be tip number 2. Focus on developing your pieces and focus on getting them out. It sounds simple, and in essence it kind of is. However, everybody makes mistakes. Everybody does something weird. Everybody starts playing h3, a3 in these sorts of positions. Focus on developing your pieces and focus on activating them. Don't deviate from that. The more you deviate from that, the more mistakes you're going to make. And trust me, I've seen even 2000s make mistakes like this, which sound very simple, and they are very simple. You just need to make a couple of adjustments. So make sure to focus on activating your pieces. So knight to c3 played by white, knight to f6, and then bishop to g5. Both sides just simply developing their pieces. cd5, ed5, and then queen a4 developing the white queen. So in this case, the bishop is under attack, so you have to do something about it. You have a couple of different options. You have a5, you have c5, you also have bishop takes c3. Now, another tip that I'm going to give you is to make correct exchanges, because if you make incorrect exchanges, or if you make exchanges like this one and you don't follow up with them correctly, you're going to get into a lot of bad positions. For example, in this position, bishop takes c3 is a theoretical move. Now we can sit here and debate whether it is a good move strategically or not. I would even argue that it's on the edge of probably not being that good strategically for black. It's more of a necessity to play this move. However, you need to understand when you make exchanges like this, how do you want to follow up? You have to be very, very careful. So in this case, castles was played. The best move, in my opinion, was to probably play c5 right away. The reason being is that after e3, black can play this move c4, which prevents the light square bishop from accessing d3. That means that you cannot get to c2, and it means that you cannot stay on this diagonal. What happened in the game was that black castled, and after e3, c5, bishop to d3 was played. But the problem is, after c4, bishop simply drops back to c2, and now you don't necessarily have a problem of bringing this bishop to a very active square, because it is on a very active diagonal over here. If it was on e2, it might be a bit more passive. So in this position, queen to e7 chosen by black, and castles chosen by Capablanca. a6 played by black, and here I want you guys to pause and look at this position right here. Now let's count the material. Let's look at all the pieces and let's see which ones are developed and which ones are not developed. So in this case, the queen is developed, so it is a very good piece for white. The bishop is also very good. The knight is also very good, and the dark square bishop. These are all developed pieces. They're all on very nice squares. which pieces are not developed. It's this rook on f1 and it is this rook on a1. So these two rooks are not developed here. So that means that we need to focus on them. So we have a couple of different options here. We have rook a to b1, but the problem with rook a to b1 is that b5 is going to be played in the future, not immediately because there's rook takes b5, but some sort of b5 is going to be played, let's say after the rook moves, and this rook is not going to be so great on b1. So instead of that, what you need to do is you need to use pawn breaks in order to activate your rooks and finish development. So it's all about developing your pieces. It's all about piece activity. You need a pawn break to accomplish that task of finishing development. So what did Capablanca play here? He followed through with that plan. He played rook to e1, preparing e4. Queen e6 chosen by black, and here you don't necessarily want to play e4 right away because there's knight takes e4, and you don't necessarily get anything here because this pawn is protected. Of course, you can't take it. Earlier, the knight was pinned, so the whole idea of queen e6 is to move the queen out of the way to control the e4 square, but not a problem. We want to play e4, we can't do it right away. Let's bring another piece to actually support e4, knight to d2, best move. And now Capablanca once again wants to execute this e4 pawn break in order to open up his rook and finish development. So b5 chosen by black, queen to a5, and now you see the downside of not having the dark squared bishop here. Earlier we talked about the fact that you need to make correct exchanges. Here, because black did not play the follow-up moves correctly, now he has some weaknesses on the dark squares. This queen can go to c7 in some lines. The queen itself is useful on a5 because now a4 pawn break becomes a possibility. So in this position, knight to e4 was played by black, and after knight captures, pawn captures, now this is a protected passed pawn, which is going to be very useful in the long run. However, this game did not even last that long, so there was no long run here. This game ended fairly quickly. But now Capablanca switches his plans. He realized that now that there's a pawn on e4, there's no more way to execute the pawn break of e4. You can try a move like f3, but the problem is after takes, you don't necessarily want to have this structure. Your king is looking a bit open. You don't want to have this. Now, instead of that, though, he chose to go for a different pawn break. Now, earlier, he moved the queen to a5 and black played a6, b5. How about we challenge this structure right here? We go a4, and this is an excellent move because now this pawn is under attack. The pawn on a6 is not defending the pawn on b5 because the rook would be hanging. So for example, I'm just going to make a random move. After a b5, you cannot go a b5 because you lose the rook in the corner. So you have to do something here. And let me go back. In the game, queen to d5 was played. And now I want to tell you a quote from Bobby Fischer. And that quote is, "Tactics flow from a superior position." We developed all of our pieces. Even this rook on e1 is not so great, so let's just put it in a yellow circle. And this rook is actually quite good because it's about to open up momentarily. But if we look at black's pieces are not so good. The queen is good. The knight is kind of okay. It's not bad, but it's not doing anything on d7. The bishop is bad. Let me just put that in a red circle. And the rooks are also bad because they're not developed whatsoever. So white has 4 really well developed pieces while black has only 1, arguably 2. So now this is a very nice position for the white pieces, and this is the exact type of position where tactics happen. Why? Because your position is extremely superior to your opponent's position. And here Capablanca found a brilliant move, a takes b5, giving up the bishop on g5. Spielmann took it, and after queen takes g5, now he takes on e4, attacking the rook in the corner. So now Capablanca has 2 pawns for the piece, but he's going to get a lot more than that. If black had played rook a7 in this position, b6 is immediately winning because after queen takes a5, Capablanca is not going to take the queen back. He's going to take on a7 and he's going to threaten promotion, and he's actually going to promote because how do you stop promotion here? If you go knight b6, there's rook b1, knight a8, simply loses the knight. So this is completely winning for the white pieces. Going back though, black did not choose rook a7. Instead of that, rook to b8 was played. And after b takes a6 here, and then rook to b5, once again, you should not really take this queen, because after rook takes a5, you cannot stop a7, a8, knight b6, a7, and you lose a lot of material here, just like this, because you're gonna lose the knight or the bishop. So that did not happen in the game. Black chose to try something at least. He probably knew that he was lost at this point, but you still have to try, right? So rook to b5 played by black, and then queen to c7. Once again, we see how this queen was very useful on a5. Now it goes to c7, where it is going to support this pawn advancement. Knight to b6 chosen by black, and just a very simple a7 chosen by Capablanca. Bishop to h3, trying something once again, but of course this is not a threat because g2 is very well defended. So rook to b1 chosen by white. After captures, f5, and then just a very simple bishop to f3, sidestepping this threat. And after f4, e takes f4, here is when Spielmann resigned the game. So what I want you to notice is that, first of all, you can't really do anything, because if you take on f4, what happens is that white will queen. If you accept the queen, then you get checkmated. The rook has to block, and after this check, like for example, queen has to block, the bishop has to block. Ultimately, you're going to get mated here. There is nothing you can do. So going back to this position right here, Capablanca really didn't do anything special up until this point when he sacrificed his bishop. Let me just go back to that point. And in this position, yes, this was an extraordinary tactic. However, what was also very important were the moves that led up to this point. And the moves that led up to this point were just very simple developing moves where Capablanca was improving his position. So let me just go back. Every move, like from the very beginning here, knight c3, bishop g5, every move is a developing move. Queen a4, and then e3, bishop d3. Capablanca did not deviate from this at all. He just continued developing. He went for a pawn break. He went for another pawn break to activate his pieces. And once the position got to a point where his pieces were this much superior to black's pieces, he gained a tactical opportunity. And this is how chess games are won, and this is how you stop blundering. You need to get a very good position from a positional point of view, and then you will have tactical opportunities. And you need to have a strategic goal when you play a chess game. You need to have a structured approach, because when you do and you actually follow through with your plan, you are going to stop blundering and you're going to win a lot more games.